moment, I felt something crack inside my chest. Not enough to change my mind, but enough to remind me that once upon a time, I'd love this woman enough to marry her. Enough to have 3 kids with her. Enough to believe we'd grow old together on some front porch somewhere, watching our grandkids play in the yard. But love isn't always enough. Sometimes it's not even relevant. Call Charles, I said, my voice gentler than it had been in months, but still absolutely final. He's the father, not me. Charles is. He's busy. The baby's beautiful, Grant. He has these tiny little fingers and he's so perfect. And I need someone here who cares about me. That's when it hit me. The real tragedy of the whole situation. She'd spent 9 months carrying this baby for people who saw her as nothing more than a high-end incubator. And now that the job was done, she was discovering exactly how much they actually cared about her as a person. Charles was busy, probably celebrating with Vivon somewhere expensive, while the woman who'd carried their child lay in a hospital bed alone and scared, realizing that she'd traded her marriage for people who couldn't even be bothered to show up when she needed them most. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I tried to warn her. I told her exactly what would happen. She'd chosen not to believe me. Melissa, I said, looking out the kitchen window at our backyard where the kids' swing set sat empty in the fading light. You made your choice. Now live with it. And then I hung up and turned off my phone because I was done being her backup plan. Done being the person she turned to when her real priorities let her down. Done being married to someone who'd put her boss's needs ahead of our family's well-being. The baby was born healthy and perfect, just like she'd said. Charles and Vivon finally showed up at the hospital with flowers and champagne and probably a photographer to document their magical moment. They got their custom-made baby, their happy ending, their perfect little family. And I got to start figuring out what my life looked like without the woman who'd been the center of it for 8 years, but who'd chosen to give the most intimate part of herself to someone else. The thing about rock bottom is that it's surprisingly comfortable once you've been there for a while. You'd think it would be this dramatic, soul-crushing experience. But really, it's more like settling into a worn-out recliner. Not pleasant exactly, but familiar enough that you stop noticing how much it sucks. Melissa came home from the hospital 3 days after giving birth. And it was like watching a ghost try to resume its old haunting routine. She moved through the house like she was sleepwalking, clutching that baby like it was the last life preserver on the Titanic and looking at me with these desperate hollow eyes that screamed, "Fix this," louder than any words ever could. But here's the thing about being the guy who warned everyone the ship was going to sink. By the time you're proven right, nobody wants to hear, "I told you so." They just want you to somehow magically make everything okay again, like you're some kind of domestic superhero who can undo months of spectacularly bad decisions with the power of forgiveness and selective amnesia. Not happening. The first week was almost funny in a dark comedy sort of way. Melissa would shuffle around the house in her ratty bathrobe looking like an extra from a zombie movie while Charles and Vivon's beautiful gift screamed at all hours of the day and night. Turns out babies don't give a damn about your motivations for having them. They're going to cry whether you're their biological mother or just the lady who happened to carry them for 9 months. She'd set up a makeshift nursery in the guest bedroom, complete with all the baby gear that Charles and Vivian had bought, but apparently couldn't be bothered to take home yet. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here she was playing house with someone else's kid while our actual children tiptoed around the house like they were afraid to breathe too loud. "Mommy, why is the baby here?" Sophie asked one morning, standing in the kitchen doorway in her favorite pajamas. The ones with unicorns that she insisted had magical powers. "I thought you said he was going to live with other people." Melissa looked like Sophie had just asked her to explain quantum physics in interpretive dance. "Well, sweetheart, sometimes babies need to stay with their birth mommy for a little while before they go to their forever home." Birth mommy? Jesus Christ. She was talking about herself like she was running some kind of baby rental service, like when we fostered Mr. Whiskers before he went to live with Grandma. Emma piped up because my 8-year-old apparently had a better grasp on the situation than my wife did. "Something like that," Melissa said, which was probably the most honest thing she'd said in months. But the comparison to our brief stint fostering Joanne's cat was more accurate than Melissa wanted to admit because just like with Mr. Whiskers, everyone expected me to help take care of something that wasn't mine and wasn't staying. The bottles started appearing in our sink like some kind of domestic plague. Formula containers cluttered our kitchen counter. Dirty diapers overflowed the garbage can, and our washing machine ran constantly, churning through an endless cycle of tiny clothes and blankets that smelled like that particular combination of baby powder and desperation. And through it all, Melissa kept shooting me these looks, part pleading, part anger, part complete bewilderment that I wasn't stepping up to help her with her noble sacrifice. Like I was failing some test I'd never agreed to take. The breaking point came on a Thursday night about 2 weeks after she'd brought the baby home. I was in the living room trying to help Jake with his math homework while the baby screamed bloody murder upstairs when Melissa appeared at the top of the stairs looking like she'd been through a blender. "Grant," she called down, her voice cracking with exhaustion. Can you please just hold him for 10 minutes? I need to take a shower. I didn't even look up from Jake's algebra worksheet. Not my baby, not my problem. It was the same response I've been giving for months, delivered with the same flat tone I perfected during our entire pregnancy nightmare. But something about hearing it in that moment with the baby crying and Melissa looking like she was about to collapse, made it land differently. She came down the stairs slowly, still holding the baby, and I could see her hands shaking. Not from exhaustion, though she was definitely that, but from rage. Pure, undiluted fury that had been building up for weeks. You know what? She said, her voice getting louder with each word. I am so sick of your attitude. You owe me this much. That's when I finally looked up from the homework. Jake was staring at both of us with wide eyes, probably wondering if his parents were about to start throwing furniture at each other. The baby was still screaming, which seemed appropriate for the moment. I owe you, I repeated, standing up slowly because this conversation was clearly going to require my full attention. I owe you what exactly? Support, she screamed, and the baby's crying got even louder, like he was trying to match her energy. I'm your wife. This is your home. You can't just pretend I don't exist. Jake, I said, keeping my voice calm. Go upstairs and play in your room for a while. Okay, buddy. He scrambled out of there like his pants were on fire, which was probably the smartest thing anyone had done in our house all week. Once he was gone, I turned back to Melissa and let her have it. All the anger I'd been swallowing for months. All the resentment I'd been choking down, all the hurt I'd been pretending didn't exist, it all came pouring out. Let me tell you what I owe you, I said, my voice deadly quiet. I owe you absolutely nothing. You want to know why? Because you're not my wife anymore. Not in any way that matters. Her face went pale, but I wasn't done. You chose to get pregnant by another man. You chose to carry your boss's baby. You chose his needs over our marriage, his wants over our family, his happiness over everything we built together. So, no, Melissa, I don't owe you support. I don't owe you help. I don't owe you a goddamn thing. It's not like that, she protested. But her voice was weaker now, like she was starting to realize how deep the hole she dug really was. It's exactly like that. I shot back. You want to play house with Charles Whitmore's baby? Fine, but don't expect me to be your backup husband when the real parents can't be bothered to show up. That's when she really lost it. The baby was screaming, she was screaming, and I was standing there watching my marriage finally die its long overdue death. You're abandoning me, she shrieked like somehow I was the villain in this story. How can you be so cruel? I'm not abandoning you, I said, grabbing my keys from the counter because I needed to get out of there before I said something I'd actually regret. I'm just refusing to clean up your mess anymore. Where are you going? She demanded. Anywhere but here, I said, heading for the door. Call Vivon. Call your sister, your mother, call the Pope for all I care. But stop calling me. I'm done. And then I left. Got in my car and drove around for 2 hours listening to talk radio and trying to remember what my life had been like before it turned into a soap opera written by someone with serious mental health issues. When I came back, the house was quiet. Melissa's car was gone and so was the baby. She'd finally packed up and left, taking her beautiful gift with her. For the first time in months, I could hear myself think. For the first time in almost a year, my house felt like home again instead of a war zone. The kids were upstairs, probably confused and scared by all the yelling, but safe. Our actual children, the ones who mattered, the ones I'd been trying to protect through this whole nightmare. I made them mac and cheese for dinner, the good stuff from the box, not the fancy organic kind Melissa always insisted on. And we ate in front of the TV like we were having an indoor picnic. Nobody mentioned the baby. Nobody asked where mommy went. They just seemed relieved that the constant crying had stopped and the house felt normal again. That night, after I tucked them all in and made sure they knew they were safe and loved, I sat in my kitchen and realized something important. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their self-destruction. Melissa had made her choice. Now she could live with it. You know what they say about peace and quiet? It never lasts long enough. For exactly 2 blissful days after Melissa packed up her baby drama and left, my house felt like an actual home again. The kids and I fell into this easy rhythm where we could eat cereal for dinner without judgment, watch cartoons without someone sighing dramatically about screen time, and generally exist without walking on eggshells around a woman who'd spent the last year making everyone else's life miserable. But apparently the universe has a sick sense of humor, because just when I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could get through this divorce without any more insanity, the flying monkeys descended. It started with my voicemail inbox lighting up like a Christmas tree. I'd come home from work to find 7 new messages, each one more ridiculous than the last. It was like Melissa had sent out some kind of emergency alert to every person who'd ever met her. Attention all friends and family members. Gran is being mean to me. Please call and tell him he's a terrible person. The first message was from her sister Clara because of course it was. Clara had apparently appointed herself as the head of the Grant as obviously Satan committee and she was taking her new job very seriously. Grant, her voice came through my phone speaker with all the warmth of a tax audit. I cannot believe what Melissa told me. She's sitting in my living room right now, crying her eyes out because her own husband abandoned her with a newborn baby. How can you be so heartless? She's your wife, Grant. Your wife? Where is your sense of responsibility? I had to laugh at that one. Responsibility, right? Because apparently I was responsible for taking care of a baby that wasn't mine. Born as a result of a decision I'd explicitly opposed for people who couldn't be bothered to handle their own parenting duties. That made perfect sense in Clara's twisted little world. The next message was from Melissa's college roommate, some woman named Jennifer, who I'd met exactly twice in 8 years of marriage, but who apparently felt qualified to judge my entire character based on whatever sob story Melissa had fed her. Grant, this is Jennifer Morrison, Melissa's friend from college. I just wanted to say that I think what you're doing is absolutely disgusting. Melissa is going through the hardest time of her life and instead of supporting her, you're being selfish and cruel. She gave the couple the most precious gift anyone can give and you're punishing her for it. I hope you can live with yourself. The most precious gift. Jesus Christ. They were all reading from the same script. Like carrying your boss's baby was some kind of humanitarian effort instead of a spectacularly bad career move that destroyed a marriage. But the real masterpiece came from her mother, Joanne, who'd apparently been saving up her passive-aggressive energy for one devastating voicemail that lasted nearly 5 minutes. Grant, dear, she began, using that saccharine tone she always used when she was about to gut you with surgical precision. I just got off the phone with my daughter, and I have to say, I'm deeply disappointed in you. Deeply disappointed. When Melissa married you, I thought she was getting a man who would stand by her through thick and thin, for better or worse. But apparently, I was wrong. She paused there, probably for dramatic effect, before launching into the main course of her guilt trip. That poor girl is sitting in Clara's apartment right now with a beautiful baby boy, and she's heartbroken because the man she married, the man who promised to love and honor her, has turned his back on her in her hour of need. She's exhausted. She's scared and she's dealing with all of this alone because you've decided to be petty and vindictive instead of being the husband she needs. Petty and vindictive. That's what Joanne called my refusal to play house with my wife's boss's baby. Not principled. Not self-respecting. Petty and vindictive. I raised 3 children, Grant. And I know what sacrifice looks like. What Melissa did. Carrying a child for a couple who couldn't have their own. That's the kind of selfless act that should make a husband proud, not angry. The fact that you can't see that says more about your character than hers. The voicemail went on for another 2 minutes, covering everything from my supposed lack of Christian values to my failure as a role model for our children. By the end of it, I was half convinced that I was indeed the Antichrist and Melissa was some kind of modern-day saint who'd been unfairly persecuted for her noble deeds. But the absolute cherry on top of this sundae came the next evening when my phone rang during dinner. I was helping Sophie cut up her chicken nuggets when Charles Whitmore's name appeared on my caller ID. Charles Whitmore. The man who'd hired my wife's reproductive system was calling to lecture me about my attitude. The balls on this guy could have been registered as their own small country. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. I had to hear what this pompoose had to say for himself. Grant, he said when I picked up his voice dripping with that fake concern that rich people use when they're slumming it with the little people. I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from Melissa. Of course, he did. Because apparently my soon-to-be ex-wife was just handing out my personal information to anyone who asked. What can I do for you, Charles? I asked, putting him on speaker so I could continue helping Sophie with her dinner. If he was going to waste my time, he could at least provide some entertainment for the kids. Well, I wanted to talk to you about this situation with Melissa and the baby. I think there's been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, right? Like I'd somehow misunderstood the part where my wife got pregnant with his kid. I'm not sure what you think I'm misunderstanding, I said, cutting up him as nuggets while she made faces at the phone. Seems pretty straightforward to me, Grant. What Melissa has done for Vivon and me, it's incredible. It's a gift beyond measure. She's given us the chance to have a family, to experience the joy of parenthood that we thought was lost to us forever. You should be proud of her. You should be supporting her through this transition. Like carrying someone else's baby was some kind of career change instead of a marriage-ending betrayal. Charles, I said, wiping barbecue sauce off Sophie's face. Let me explain something to you. You hired my wife to carry your baby. You destroyed my marriage. You got what you paid for. Now it's your responsibility to deal with the consequences. There was a pause and I could practically hear him trying to figure out how to spin this in his favor. But Grant, you're still part of this family. We're all connected now through this beautiful child. We need to work together, support each other. That's when I lost it because this rich entitled piece of garbage who treated my wife like a rental womb was trying to tell me that I was part of his family now. Like his money gave him the right to reorganize my entire life to suit his convenience. Listen to me very carefully. Charles, I said, my voice getting deadly quiet. We are not family. We are not connected. We are not anything. You wanted a baby, you got one. You hired my wife's body and destroyed my marriage in the process. But here's the thing that makes this your problem, not mine, Grant. I don't think you understand. No, I understand perfectly. You thought you could buy your way into parenthood without dealing with any of the messy parts? Well, congratulations. Those messy parts include middle-of-the-night feedings, diaper changes, and a woman who's probably realizing that being a surrogate isn't quite the glamorous experience she thought it would be. But that's your mess to clean up, not mine. But Melissa needed to think about what she was doing before she did it. I interrupted. She needed to consider how this would affect her actual family before she agreed to carry your baby. She needed to listen to her husband when he told her this was a terrible idea. But she didn't do any of those things, did she? The line went quiet, and for a moment, I thought maybe I'd actually gotten through to him. Maybe he was starting to understand that his money couldn't buy him absolution from the chaos he'd helped create. But then he came back with that same smooth, condescending tone. Grant, I think you're being unreasonable. This is about more than just you and Melissa. There's a child involved now. Your child, I said, cutting him off again. Your responsibility. Your problem. I never wanted any part of this arrangement. I told everyone it was a bad idea. And now I'm supposed to clean up the mess. I don't think so. And then I hung up on him because rich or not, boss or not, he didn't get to lecture me about responsibility while sitting in his fancy office, completely removed from the reality of what he'd set in motion. That night, after the kids were in bed, I sat in my kitchen and marveled at the sheer audacity of these people. They'd all rallied around Melissa like she was some kind of victim instead of a woman who'd made a series of spectacularly bad choices that had predictable consequences. Not one of them had called to ask how I was doing. Not one had acknowledged that maybe, just maybe, I had a right to be angry about my wife carrying another man's baby. Not one had suggested that perhaps Melissa should have considered her husband's feelings before agreeing to this insane arrangement. But they all had plenty to say about my supposed failures as a husband and human being. The begging parade was in full swing, and I was apparently the only one who could see how ridiculous the whole thing was. If you've never been through a divorce, let me paint you a picture. Imagine the worst job interview of your life crossed with a root canal sprinkled with the emotional devastation of watching your entire adult life get dissected by strangers in cheap suits. Now multiply that by about 1,000 and you're getting close to what it's like to sit in a courtroom while lawyers argue over who gets to keep the good dinnerware and whether you're a terrible human being. The whole thing started 6 months after I'd filed the papers because apparently the legal system moves at roughly the same speed as continental drift. By the time we actually made it to court, Melissa had settled into her new life as a single mother living in her sister's spare bedroom. Charles and Vivian had presumably bonded with their custom-made baby, and I'd gotten comfortable with the idea that my marriage was dead than disco. But Melissa, being Melissa, couldn't just sign the papers and move on with her life. No, she had to turn our divorce into some kind of three-ring circus where she was the tragic heroine, and I was the mustache-twirling villain who'd abandoned his pregnant wife in her hour of need. Her lawyer was this guy named Richard Steinberg, one of those slick operators who probably learned his trade watching reruns of LA Law, and figured out that righteous indignation pays better than actual legal knowledge. He had perfectly styled hair, a tan that definitely came from a bottle, and the kind of practiced sincerity that made you want to check your wallet after shaking his hand. My lawyer, on the other hand, was James Holloway, the same guy I played baseball with in high school, who'd gone on to law school while I was studying accounting and probably wondering why anyone would voluntarily choose a career that involved this much paperwork. Jim was the kind of lawyer who wore off-the-rack suits and actually cared about winning cases instead of just looking good while losing them. The courtroom itself looked exactly like every courtroom you've ever seen on TV, with paneling that had probably been installed during the Coolidge administration, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look like they were suffering from a vitamin deficiency, and that particular smell that all government buildings seem to have like disinfectant mixed with broken dreams. Melissa sat at the plaintiff's table looking like she'd stepped out of a tragic single mother photo shoot. She was wearing this simple black dress that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Her hair was pulled back in a style that said, "I'm too devastated to care about my appearance, but somehow still look perfect." And she had this expression on her face like she was bravely enduring an unthinkable injustice. Behind her in the gallery sat her entire support squad. Clara looking appropriately outraged. Joan dabbing at her eyes with a tissue like she was watching a particularly sad episode of This Is Us. And I you not. Charles and Vivian Whitmore sitting in the back row like they were attending a community theater production of Poor Melissa Gets Screwed Over by Her Mean Husband. The audacity of those two showing up was almost impressive. Here they were, The people who'd started this whole mess by hiring my wife's reproductive system, sitting in my divorce proceedings like concerned family members instead of the home wrecking they actually were. Steinberg opened with what I can only describe as a masterclass in emotional manipulation. He painted a picture of Melissa as this selfless saint who'd made the ultimate sacrifice to help a childless couple only to be cruelly abandoned by her heartless husband during the most vulnerable time of her life. "Your Honor," he said, gesturing toward Melissa like she was some kind of religious icon. "My client is a woman who exemplifies the very best of human nature. When she learned that her employer and his wife were struggling with infertility, she made the extraordinary decision to serve as their surrogate mother. This wasn't a decision she made lightly, Your Honor. This was an act of pure compassion, a gift of life itself, a gift of life." Jesus, these people really were all reading from the same script. But instead of supporting his wife during this difficult time, Steinberg continued, his voice getting more dramatic with each word. "The defendant chose to abandon her. He filed for divorce while she was pregnant. Your Honor, he refused to attend the birth of the child she was carrying. He has shown a callous disregard for his wife's emotional and physical well-being. That is frankly shocking. He went on like that for 20 minutes, painting me as some kind of monster who'd kicked a pregnant woman to the curb for having the audacity to help people in need. By the time he was done, I was half convinced that I should be locked up for crimes against humanity instead of just trying to get out of a marriage that had turned into a nightmare. But then it was Jim's turn. And that's when things got interesting. Your Honor," Jim said, standing up with a stack of papers that looked thick enough to stop a bullet. "The plaintiff's attorney has told you a very compelling story. It's just too bad that story has almost nothing to do with the facts of this case." He walked over to the evidence table and picked up a manila folder that looked like it could have contained the secrets of the universe. "The facts, Your Honor, are these. Mrs. Walker made a unilateral decision to carry another man's child without consulting her husband. When Mr. Walker expressed his opposition to this arrangement, she ignored him. When he explained how this decision would affect their marriage, she dismissed his concerns. And when he told her explicitly that proceeding with this surrogacy would end their marriage, she chose to proceed anyway." Jim opened the folder and pulled out what looked like a phone bill on steroids. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit into evidence a series of text messages between the plaintiff and her sister in which she admits that her husband was opposed to the surrogacy from the beginning. I'd also like to submit several email exchanges between the plaintiff and her employer, Mr. Whitmore, in which she discusses the surrogacy arrangement without ever mentioning her husband's objections." Steinberg jumped up like his chair was on fire. "Objection, Your Honor. These communications are privileged." "Over," the judge said, looking like he was already tired of this case, and it had barely started. "Continue, Mr. Holloway." Jim smiled the way a shark smiles when it spots a wounded seal. "Your Honor, these communications clearly show that Mrs. Walker was fully aware of her husband's position on this matter. In one text message to her sister, she explicitly states, and I quote, 'Grant is being such a baby about this. It's my body, my choice. He doesn't get a vote.'" I watched Melissa's face go pale as Jim read that text out loud. Apparently, she'd forgotten about her little sister Toyster honesty session. "Furthermore, Your Honor, I'd like to submit a recording of a conversation between Mr. and Mrs. Walker, in which Mr. Walker clearly states that if she proceeds with the surrogacy, their marriage will be over. Mrs. Walker's response, and again I quote, was, 'Then maybe you should rethink what being a husband means.'" The judge looked up from his notes with the expression of a man who just realized he was dealing with something way more complicated than a standard divorce case. "Mr. Holloway, are you suggesting that your client warned his wife about the consequences of her actions?" "That's exactly what I'm suggesting, Your Honor." Mr. Walker made his position crystal clear from the beginning. He told his wife that carrying another man's child would destroy their marriage. She chose to ignore that warning. The dissolution of this marriage is the direct result of Mrs. Walker's decision to prioritize her employer's needs over her husband's clearly stated concerns. Steinberg tried to recover, arguing that a husband should support his wife's decisions regardless of his personal feelings. But the damage was done. The texts, the emails, the recorded conversation, it all painted a picture of a woman who'd made a unilateral decision to destroy her marriage and was now shocked that her husband had actually followed through on his warnings. The best part was watching Charles and Vivon squirm in their seats as it became increasingly clear that their beautiful gift had come at the cost of someone else's family. They probably thought they were just hiring a surrogate, not destroying a marriage. But intent doesn't really matter when the results speak for themselves. By the time the proceedings wrapped up for the day, it was pretty clear which way the wind was blowing. Melissa looked like she'd been hit by a truck. Her legal dream team looked like they were already planning their exit strategy. And I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, the truth would actually matter in this circus. Hope that someone would finally acknowledge that I wasn't the villain in this story, just a guy who tried to protect his marriage and been ignored. Hope that when this was all over, I could finally move on with my life and stop being defined by my wife's spectacularly bad decisions. 2 weeks after the courtroom circus ended, I found myself sitting in the same uncomfortable wooden chair, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of the tense drama of competing narratives, there was just the cold, hard reality of legal consequences being handed down by a judge who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on the planet. Judge Morrison was one of those old school guys who'd probably seen every sob story, every excuse, and every attempt at emotional manipulation that the legal system had to offer. He had gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the expression of a man who'd stopped being surprised by human stupidity sometime around the Clinton administration. After reviewing all the evidence presented, he began, his voice carrying the weight of finality that only comes from years of making decisions that change people's lives forever. This court finds that the dissolution of this marriage was the direct result of unilateral decisions made by the plaintiff without regard for her spouse's clearly stated objections. I felt something loosen in my chest, something that had been wound tight for almost a year. This was it. This was the moment when someone in authority finally acknowledged that I wasn't the bad guy in this story. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, the court finds that the plaintiff's decision to prioritize her employment obligations over her marital responsibilities demonstrates a fundamental disregard for the stability required to maintain a healthy family environment. Melissa sat at her table looking like someone had just told her that Santa Claus wasn't real and the Easter Bunny was a fraud. Her perfectly composed, tragic mother facade was cracking around the edges, and I could see the panic starting to creep in as she realized that her sob story wasn't going to get her what she wanted. Therefore, this court awards primary physical custody of the minor children, Jacob Walker, Emma Walker, and Sophie Walker, to the defendant, Grant Walker. The plaintiff will be granted supervised visitation rights to be exercised at times and locations to be determined by the court-appointed mediator. Supervised visitation. That was the legal way of saying, we don't trust you to be alone with your own kids without someone watching to make sure you don't screw up their lives any worse than you already have. The gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot. And just like that, it was over. 9 months of pregnancy drama, 6 months of legal warfare, and years of marriage. All of it officially dead and buried in about 10 minutes of judicial pronouncement. Melissa broke down completely. Not the pretty, dignified crying you see in movies, but the ugly, desperate sobbing of someone who just realized that actions have consequences and lawyers can't always fix stupid decisions. Her sister Clara rushed forward to comfort her, shooting me a look that could have melted steel, like somehow I was responsible for the mess Melissa had made of her own life. I don't want to lose them, Melissa whispered through her tears loud enough for everyone in the courtroom to hear. It was probably meant to be one last appeal to my non-existent sympathy. One final attempt to make me the villain for enforcing the natural consequences of her choices. I stood up, straightened my tie, the good one I'd bought specifically for this occasion, and looked down at the woman who had once been my partner and everything. Then you should have thought about that before you decided to carry another man's baby, I said, my voice calm and steady. You should have thought about them when Charles asked you to be his surrogate. You should have thought about them when I told you this would destroy our family. But you didn't think about them, did you? You thought about yourself. Her crying got louder, more desperate. But I wasn't done. You want to keep seeing our kids? Then show up for them. Be the mother they deserve instead of the woman who traded their family stability for her boss's approval. Prove that they matter more to you than your career ambitions or your need to impress people who don't give a damn about you. I picked up my briefcase, the same one I'd carried to work every day for 8 years, back when I thought I was building a life with someone who shared my priorities, and headed for the door. But understand this, Melissa, I said, turning back for one last look at the mother of my children. I won't let you drag them into your mess. I won't let you use them as emotional support animals while you figure out how to live with the consequences of your choices. They deserve better than that. They deserve a parent who puts them first. Outside the courthouse, the September air felt crisp and clean, like the world had been washed by rain, even though the sky was perfectly clear. Jim walked beside me, probably savoring his victory, but smart enough not to gloat about it. You did the right thing, Grant, he said as we reached our cars. Those kids need stability, and Melissa's proven she's not capable of providing that right now. I nodded. But I wasn't thinking about being right or wrong. I was thinking about Jake, Emma, and Sophie waiting for me at home with a babysitter. Probably wondering why Daddy had to go to court again. And when things would finally get back to normal. For the first time in almost a year, I had an answer for them. Things were going to get back to normal starting right now. No more drama, no more chaos, no more wondering whether the woman who was supposed to be their mother would make another decision that would turn their world upside down. Just me and them building something stable and sane from the wreckage of what used to be our family. It wasn't the happy ending I'd imagined when I'd first gotten married, but it was better than the alternative. It was a chance for all of us to start over, to build something new without the constant threat of someone else's bad decisions destroying everything we cared about. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my kitchen on a Saturday morning, watching Jake attempt to make pancakes while Emma argues with Sophie about whether syrup belongs on scrambled eggs. The house smells like coffee and slightly burned batter. The morning light is streaming through windows that actually stay clean now that nobody's crying on them constantly. And for the first time in what feels like forever, everything is exactly as chaotic as it should be. This is what normal looks like. Not the fake Instagram perfect normal that people pretend to have, but real normal. The kind where your 8-year-old puts too much vanilla in the pancake mix. Your 6-year-old insists that purple is a perfectly reasonable color for breakfast food. And your 4-year-old tries to feed pancakes to the dog we don't have. Dad, can we get a dog? Sophie asks, right on cue because apparently my kids have developed telepathic powers. Ask me again when you can remember to put your clothes in the hamper instead of on the floor. I tell her, which is parents speak for, not until you're 30 and living in your own house. The funny thing about divorce is that everyone expects you to be miserable. They expect you to be bitter, lonely, struggling to figure out how to braid your daughter's hair or explain why mommy doesn't live here anymore. And sure, there were some rough patches, like the night Emma asked if mommy stopped loving us, or when Jake's teacher called because he'd been acting out at school, but mostly it's been peaceful, quiet in a good way. Like when you finally turn off a TV that's been playing static in the background for so long you forgot it was even on. The kids have their routine now. School, homework, dinner that doesn't come with a side of drama. Weekend movies where nobody sighs dramatically about screen time. Bedtime stories that don't get interrupted by phone calls from people wanting to discuss the moral implications of my abandonment of a woman who chose another man's baby over her own family. Melissa still calls sometimes, usually when she's run out of money, discover that Charles and Vivant aren't quite as generous with their beautiful gift provider as they were during the pregnancy, or realize that being a single mom living in her sister's spare bedroom isn't quite the empowering experience she thought it would be. Grant, I know we've had our differences, but could you help me out with the electric bill? Just this once. Grant, the baby's been crying all night, and I don't know what to do. Charles said they're too busy to help this week. Grant, I made a mistake. I see that now. Can we talk about working things out? The answer is always the same. No. Not because I'm trying to be cruel, but because I learned something important during this whole nightmare. You can't save people from the consequences of their own choices. You can't love someone into making better decisions. And you definitely can't build a stable life with someone who's willing to torch everything you've built together for the approval of people who see her as nothing more than a means to an end. Her choices are her burden now, not mine. The kids see her every other weekend, supervised visits at a neutral location because the court decided she needed to prove she could prioritize their well-being over her own drama. Sometimes she shows up, sometimes she doesn't. The kids have learned not to get their hopes up too high, which breaks my heart, but also makes me proud of how resilient they are. Dad, Emma says, interrupting my thoughts. Jake put eggshells in the pancakes. Did not. Jake protests. That's just texture. Gross texture, Sophie adds helpfully. I look at my 3 kids, my actual kids, the ones I chose to protect when their mother chose something else, and feel something I haven't felt in a long time. Contentment. Not happiness exactly because this isn't how I thought my life would turn out, but contentment with the knowledge that I did the right thing even when it was hard. All right, troops, I say, standing up to survey the pancake disaster. Let's start over. And this time, maybe we leave the eggshells out of the recipe. Can we put chocolate chips in instead? Sophie asks. Absolutely. I say because life's too short for plain pancakes and too precious to waste on people who don't appreciate what they have. Outside it's starting to rain. But inside our house, our actual home now, not just the place where we used to live, it's warm and safe and exactly where we belong. Not my baby, not my problem, but these kids. This life we're building together. This peace we've found in the aftermath of someone else's spectacularly bad decisions. This is all mine and I'm never letting anyone take it away from us again.